Is it the day that the College Football Super League begins to take shape? Very well could be. As we have talked about for a significant amount of time on the show, it seems like every day we get a new update on what the College Football Super League or the changing face of college football looks like. It was interesting yesterday. Ross Dellinger let go of an article where he talked about how the powers that be in college football, Charlie Baker, the commissioner essentially of the NCAA, the president, and the Power Four conferences have made this deal where they are going to break away into their own tier, which is not new. We've known this for several months. Charlie Baker himself talked about this and proposed this pretty much from day one of him taking the job, and now we're starting to see that move into reality, and I think it's absolutely the right decision to make. Are the G5 schools, the other, 320-something universities, going to be happy about this? I would think about 300 of them will be, because what we're talking about and what Yahoo Sports detailed yesterday is a division for the P4 that simply pays more, because you have to remember, revenue sharing is a thing, and universities will have to begin sharing $22 million with their athletes on an annual basis. That's a lot of bread. If you are in the middle of nowhere and you are a perennial basketball school and you just happen to have a football program, that's a lot of money. And I think that's why you see the G5 is the G5. And I understand universities in the better G5 leagues, the Mountain West specifically, and usually this raises the dander of the Fresno States and the UNLVs of the world. Hey, that's all well and good, Boise State. You can get upset about it. But the question is, do you want to give away $22 million a year to your athletes? And I think overwhelmingly, most of the universities in the G5 are going to say, no, thanks, we'll play down here. And I think that's ultimately what this comes down to. But I also think you have to ask yourself, is this the right move? Because you are, by giving the P4 all of this power, Jake, aren't you essentially saying that you really you don't matter if you're one of the other non-P4 leagues?
Yeah, I mean, basically what you're saying is that you don't want it's almost like, hey, we don't really want the trouble of having to try to compete with the power conferences, and we don't want to deal with revenue sharing. We don't want to have to play in sort of this, a lot of people would call it a messy situation for the power conferences with the money and how everything's kind of working with the portal and NIL. Almost saying, at the G5 level, we would rather stay in more of a, an amateur feel, where it's a traditional, hey, you're going to school, but, maybe you happen to play basketball or you happen to play football, but you're not someone who, is going to go and chase the league, or like they want more of that feel, because they're not operating with these huge, commercial advertising opportunities. They're not operating with the amount of money that these power conferences and schools within those power conferences are. And I'm completely fine with that. I think it's always been kind of a clunky sort of, round peg going into a square hole type situation when you're sitting here saying that Georgia is playing in the same financial landscape as a Boise State or a smaller school. And it doesn't mean that these smaller schools are bad or lesser or somehow, diminished. It just basically is saying, yeah, we probably shouldn't have these juggernaut of a university that's got 50,000 students at it playing in the same pool with a school that has 10,000 students and is way smaller and isn't competing on the same level. And so I think this was an inevitability. We were always going to get to a place where we needed some separation of classes. And I think it's really smart for the sport. And I think it puts the decision back on the kid on some level to say, hey, what pool do you want to play in? How competitive do you want to be in your given sport? Are you someone that wants to play at the highest level of college football or college basketball? Then yeah, you're probably going into this tier. If you're someone that knows you're probably not going to be a professional athlete, but you'd love to play some college athletics in addition to getting an education, you're going to go over here. And I think it's just fine. It's absolutely just fine.
Yeah, I think I totally disagree. I think it is one of these situations where it's understanding who you are and where you are. And I think sometimes these G5 schools, and I think the exact number is 328, tend to confuse themselves. And their fans tend to confuse themselves with, Alabama. Can certain G5 schools compete with Alabama in football? I'm sure they can on a one-off occasional basis, but you have to ask yourself, if you are one of these non-P4 schools, are you going to opt into revenue sharing $22 million a year with your athletes? And my guess is the large majority of universities will not opt into that. My guess is that this is simply going to come down to a dollars and cents argument. And if you are a fan of a G5 school, I think you need to understand who you are and where you are, because if you are Fresno State and if you are San Diego State is a very good example of this, you don't have the financial resources that the bottom half of the Big Ten, the bottom half of the Big 12, you don't have the resources at San Diego State that somebody like a Oak State, like a Texas Tech, like a BYU has. You don't have those resources. You're not opting into that, and that's for the better. And I start looking at universities like the Wyomings of the world, the Dakota schools, these small schools where you're going to see an athletic department that says, hey, we're here to educate people, and we also compete in sports. That's a very big difference from a P4 university that says, hey, you don't even have to go to class. In a lot of cases, when you're a basketball player, you're a one and done. You don't even have to go to class your freshman year. You're going to show up, you're going to live high on the hog, and then you're going to go to the NBA draft. That's the reality of it. You're never going to get grade checked. You're never, you have to understand that these universities, a lot of them are just a warehouse of building boys into men physically. You just have to understand that. Is school involved? Yes. I think in a lot of cases, most cases it is. It's in every case involved if you're one of those 328 other schools. There's no other way to argue that. And I think that's really where the rubber meets the road. We can sit here and we can romanticize the Statue of Liberty and Boise State. And the reality is Boise State and Utah took two very different paths after that moment in time. When you had Utah as the original BCS buster, they went to the Pac-12, they took their lumps, and now they're a national powerhouse. Where's Boise? Still in Boise, still in the G5, have never been able to get themselves to the P5, now P4 level. And I think it very much is just simply a line of demarcation. I think that's a very good example of it.
Yeah, and that's why I say, like, I just think that we were, with the direction that the power conferences are heading, with how much money they're going to be looking to try and make because of this revenue, sharing situation that we have at play. It makes it so that the smaller school can't compete at the same level, and it shouldn't be, because I feel like a lot of people are like, oh, well, then why would you want to go to Boise State, or why would you want to go to this school or that school? And it's not really about that per se. It's really about making sure that we're not asking too much of somebody who's only making $1 at their school when Alabama's making $20. Like, that's not a fair competition. So I just think that a lot of people, want to look at this meeting that took place between Charlie Baker and these four commissioners of their power conferences and say, oh, well, the power conferences are trying to do more shady stuff. And it's not shady at all. It's what they're doing is trying to smooth this out for everybody. Because the other thing is, it doesn't help the power conferences to have all this drama around money. Nobody wants to be in court. Nobody wants to be, getting sued or in trouble. All they're trying to do is recoup the $22 million that they're now going to have to split with the athletes. So that's why I say, like, I don't know that this is necessarily a bad thing, like a lot of people on Twitter and a lot of people are talking about. I think that this was a necessary step that had to take place.
You're talking about a very small financial pot in the G5. You're talking about, what's the average athletic department budget at a P4 university? $150 million? How many G5 universities are playing at $15 to $20 million? Most of them. So when you say to them, hey, yeah, you got to pay that NIL lawsuit. Yeah, you got to pay your fair share on that. Also, you're going to have to opt into this $22 million a year in revenue sharing. They can't afford it. And I think this comes back to who you are and where you are. And it's universities like Oregon State, Washington State, who now, again, find themselves in no man's land. You're in no man's land. If you are Oregon State and you are Washington State, can you afford $22 million on top of your NIL lawsuit payment?
No way.
That's a tough nut to crack, dude. It is a tough nut to crack. And I think it's one of those things where you just have to understand that this is, and I don't know what this is, the haves and the have-nots. This is Beverly Hills versus Compton. This is, like this, it's just the reality of where we are in college sports. I don't know how you fix it. But I'm also the guy who believes I don't think that the G5 should have access to the national championship.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry. I don't believe that. If you are on par, you need to show that financially, in recruiting, in education. Like you need to, and I use Utah, the University of Utah as an example because of the jump that they took and the mountain that they've climbed. Has BYU traveled the same path? Not close. BYU is not grown athletically. BYU has resources beyond our comprehension because of the church. Do they deploy those resources? They don't. Have they competed for Rose Bowls and put themselves in a position to be in the national championship conversation? They haven't. They haven't. And that's because they were never in a P5 conference. And now that they are, you're going to watch them sputter and struggle, hopefully for 2, maybe 3 years. And then in 2 years from now, they're competing at a high level in the Big 12. We'll see. But you look at Utah struggled for what, a decade?
Yeah, they grinded.
I mean, it is not easy. And so again, we come back to these conversations about, should we be excluding the G5? Should we? I don't know. Are we? Yeah. And really, it's the G5 is excluding themselves, because the rubber will meet the road when these universities opt in or not into the $22 million revenue sharing.
Yeah, and I completely agree. I mean, if you can't afford to revenue share at $22 million a year, then you shouldn't have access to the college football playoff. Now, if you want to, if your rebuttal to that is, hey, we need to create a college football playoff for the lower tier, I'm fine with that. If you want to have a separate thing for folks who don't want to opt in to play with the big boys, cool. That's fine. I'm good with that. I think that would we've been talking about that for how long now, right? Like how, the lower school, the lower, financial schools that make less money need to have their own championship. We see it all across sports, right? You've got the minor leagues and you've got the major leagues. There's nothing wrong with it. And I think that will probably happen once this whole structure gets officially put out.
But how do you go to somebody like Boise? Again, I'll just use anybody in the Mountain West and say to them, okay, if you want to play at this tier, you got to have 100, let's say 140, 130, $125 million budget for athletics. How does that work in Boise, Idaho? How does that work in Fresno, California? How does that work in Logan, Utah? In Colorado Springs? At Colorado State? How does that work? And the answer is it doesn't work. I can't find a way where in our current climate and environment, the state school in San Diego is going to be able to say, yeah, we'll allocate $140 million to our athletic budget. 150 million. Like, I have trouble believing that.
Yeah, and what's interesting too about the state schools in the G5 is their level of aggressiveness is different seemingly by each example. So like we know that San Diego State tried to get into the Pac-12 and we saw how that situation played out. Obviously, we've got it going the other way with Oregon State and Washington State being forced to take a step back because of the situation. And so that's why I say people shouldn't be forced to play at the revenue sharing level. We should not force the small school to do that. What we should do is give them that choice. And if they want to make that choice and that commitment financially as a school, then okay, cool. Now you get access to certain benefits. Because I feel like the more we talk about it and the more we go through it, this just sounds like a regular life situation. Hey, if you want this certain benefit, if you want access to this, pool of perks, if you will, you have to pay more money. I mean, how many times in life do we hear that? Right? Like this is nothing new for us as everyday people. Yet for the college football system, this is like a huge shift in how the college football system does business. And I'm curious, to your point, like what G5 is going to, be really aggressive. Who is going to make that jump and try to play with the big boys?
Do you understand that Ohio State's athletic expenses were $275 million in their last reported year? Do you understand that San Diego State's athletic expenses were $96 million? Do you understand that, like, South Dakota State is a really good example, prolific football program, $20 million athletic budget. So you're talking about Ohio State allocating $250 million more than South Dakota State. $154 million or even more than that, right? If they're, what is that? You take away $180 million more. That's wild. And so we get into these conversations about who's got athletic budget and who doesn't. There's a reason that Georgia, Bama, and Ohio State win, because they spend more and they allocate more, so they make more.
And they should be rewarded for that.
It's
and they've been rewarded for that. And they will continue to be rewarded for that. And I think that, it just is what it is. I'm sure that we'll have people, in our comments section, both during the show and as the day goes on, who say, oh, well, it's not fair to the G5. It's not fair to the smaller school. Well, fair or not fair, it's business, man. Like it is dollar evaluation. So if you're willing to spend $275 million on your athletic department, then yeah, you should be playing for a ton of money, right? Like you should be playing for the biggest and best you can get, and they are. So I still am curious. Other questions that might come to mind with this situation would be, okay, if we split this off, then with, TV contracts and agreements that are currently in place, I'm curious how scheduling will go, because obviously we all know and love the early season gimme game for Alabama. We all know the Poughkeepsie State game on Georgia's schedule. So does that style of scheduling now go away? Do we get better matchups more consistently because we've split everything off? I would think so. But those are questions that have to be vetted out and figured out.
Listen to these numbers. This is the Sportico. And by the way, where I'm getting these numbers is Sportico has a database of every university's expenses and revenue. Ohio State's overall revenue, $279 million. 549. $279,549,000.
Something real.
That is their athletic revenue. Their athletic expenses, $274,948,000. That's a good tax guy. That's a really good tax guy. Like, so you can pick any school you want, right? And if you look at Boise State by comparison, Boise State, total athletic revenue, which is crazy to me, $60,653,000.
So why in the world?
Holy fuck!
Right? Like, why in the world would
Boise
State be thrown into the ring with Ohio State?
Come on,
right? Like, it's not like this. Like, that might be the best example we've ever used. Like, why would we do that? Why would we not just have Boise State competing with like for likes.
Georgia, total athletic revenue, 210,108,000. Okay. What about the Fresno State Bulldogs? How about a total revenue number of $48,938,000?
So Boise State is one of the most popular G5 schools, right? When you ask, hey, what G5 school you name? Oh, Boise State. Okay. You start looking at some of these other ones, dude. I'm sure
God
there are other
damn.
G5s that operate at 25, 30 a year, right? If Fresno State's 48, what is some rando in Nowhereville that you've ever heard of, right? Like, I mean, that's what we're talking about.
It's wild to me.
I mean, you're talking about even for Boise State to compete in a situation where they'd have to pay the $22 million in revenue sharing. Now you're talking about operating at 40 some odd million dollars in your athletic department, right?
I mean, it's crazy to me.
So when we talk about, hey, why do we need a split? Well, we need a split because Ohio State can take 22 million and throw it in a bucket tomorrow and they'll figure it out. But Boise State or Fresno State or Washington and State and Oregon State, whoever you want to point to, are not going to be able to do that. That you're talking about in some cases that being 50 to 60% of your overall athletic budget. You can't do it.
It's crazy. And you start looking at some of these numbers and I was doing this last night, just flipping around, and it's crazy to me that you have you have some of these schools that are making real money. And then I go look at somebody like Cal, who is debt ridden, and their total revenue is $126 million. Their expenses are $134 million. They're losing, and I've tried to tell people this, they're losing over $10 million a year in athletics because of the debt that they have.
What about a school like UConn, a basketball heavy school that has a football team? What about a school like that? What does that look like?
UConn, their total revenue for athletics, $93,115,000.
So this is a school.
They make $6 million on football and $10 million on basketball.
So this is a school that's basketball heavy. The football program obviously just exists. It's not really anything of consequence.
What are their expenses on football? So they made $6 million on football.
Yeah.
Right? Their expenses on football, $20,070,000.
That's their expenses.
They're losing $14 million and $14 million a year. And what have I told you about UConn? Nobody wants to subsidize their $14 million football shortfall. That's what's going to happen.
And you think UConn's going to be out here trying to pay $22 million in revenue sharing with those kind of numbers? No, they're not. No, they're not.
It is.
So like UConn has a very difficult decision to make because, again, this is a football conversation, but I am genuinely curious if this ever bleeds into basketball. Does this bleed into baseball? I highly doubt it bleeds into baseball, but I could definitely see something in basketball. Absolutely.
And then you look at somebody like a Florida State, and
another great example.
Florida State reports revenue at $169,558,000. $91,476,000 in football revenue. Their expenses are $172 million. And a lot of those expenses, coaches' compensation, $24.4 million. So I look at some of this stuff and I'm like, dude, you are out of your mind if you think that these G5s are going to be able to compete. When we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars just in revenue alone.
Yeah.
There's Ohio State's got lapped you by $200 million. So I think this is what it should be. I think this is what it should be. And I don't think there's any way for most people to grasp or get their head around the fact that you're never going to compete. You're never going to be able to, on a regular year in, year out basis, compete with the Ohio States of the world because they are a behemoth. And imagine being Ohio, not Ohio State, the University of Ohio.
You know, that other guy
Trying to compete, the Bobcats, trying to compete with Ohio State, who's at $274 million, and you're at Ohio, the University of Ohio, $29 million. $29,970,000. Your expenses are $33,220,000. Like, do you understand the disparity there? And you'll never know about Notre Dame. You'll never know about BYU because they are private institutions,
right,
who do not have to report. And Notre Dame is notorious for not reporting their numbers. Like you look at, and I want to say that I can't remember who published it, but their numbers are that they made $215 million and they spent $170 million. And there is just I'm telling you, there's no chance that's accurate. There's no chance that's accurate. In my opinion,
right,
having been around Notre Dame, I think they are far more than 215 million.
Yeah.
But Notre Dame does not want you to know that.
And I wouldn't release those details if I didn't have to either.
Yeah, Notre Dame doesn't want you to know that. All right, less of us, more of you on the Monty Show, presented by The Advocates at theadvocates.com. You guys, again, I will say it every single day on this show. I appreciate everybody who has to date donated to The Advocates in their work with the road home. This is a critical time of year. And I understand that everybody's got real life and people are struggling in this world. And if you are struggling and you are not able to contribute, hey, I appreciate you being here. If you have it in your wallet and you have it in your heart, I ask you $5, $1 million, whatever you have to contribute. If you have a $20 bill, and really $20 in your bank account, because who carries cash anymore?
Right.
If you have $20 that you can donate on Venmo to Advocates Donations, please consider doing that right now. Don't wait. Don't do it at lunch. Don't do it tonight. Do it right now. Advocates Donations, they are partnered with the Road Home. Every dollar you donate goes directly to the Road Home, which is one of this country's foremost homeless advocacy groups. And they are working right now. It's called the Apple Tree. And if you're in Utah, go into the Advocates offices up and down the Wasatch Front. You can make your donation in person. You can pick your apple. It's a really good program that provides basic school essentials for kids who are homeless, for kids who are underprivileged, to go to school and compete academically. And one of the stories we've been telling this week is how last year when they were giving kids backpacks, because one of the things that we take for granted is a backpack. Well, every kid's got a backpack, only they don't. When you're homeless and your parents aren't working, or maybe you're in a single family home and you're living in a car, or you're sleeping on different couches every night, your mom or your dad or your parents can't afford a backpack. So you go to school holding a notebook. Where do you keep your books? There are kids who are living in their lockers, quite literally, because they don't have bedrooms or dressers or closets. That's what we're talking about. $20 to the Advocates, $5 to the Advocates. Makes a huge difference. It goes right to those kids for clothing, things like socks, underwear, clothes that are not torn, ripped, or dirty, right? It gives these kids a sense of confidence in their ability to compete academically. It's huge. Advocates donations on Venmo. If you have it in your heart, you have it in your wallet, please consider making a donation. In the comment section on Venmo, please put the Monty Show school kids, the Monty Show homeless, the Monty Show kids, whatever you want to put. It really makes a difference to the advocates. Advocates donations on Venmo. All right, let's see who's in this morning on the show. First one in today, Mike Smith. Months ago, I would laugh at Florida State and Clemson to the Big 12. However, it seems there is a new blurb every day. Hit the like button. Yes, please do hit the like button. And speaking of a new blurb, did anybody see what Greg Sankey said on 1010XL in Jacksonville yesterday? He was being interviewed, and I'm a little surprised by this. I am a little surprised that the commissioner of the SEC took what is not even a veiled shot. This is a direct shot. He punched Florida State in the face when he said this.
So you take Georgia just because it's easy to remember. Within the league, they play at Ole Miss, finished with a win over Penn State, had 2 losses last year to Georgia and to Alabama. They play at Alabama, and they play at Texas. This is Georgia.
Right.
I mean, who's got 3 games like that on their schedule?
Yeah.
And they play Florida, too. You know. Don't forget that.
Well, no, that's right. I'm going. The neutral site, but I'm going to away.
Yeah.
And then they open with Clemson.
Right.
They finish with Georgia Tech, and there's a lot in between. How are you evaluating that against other schedules?
Yeah.
That could be think last year, that was one of the 4 best teams, period.
There's no question.
There's people in your listening audience that say, well, there he goes again.
Yeah.
We didn't stomp our feet.
Right.
We didn't, fly banners over places. That was one of the 4 best teams.
Right.
They lost 1 game in 2 years. Bad second half, second quarter, third quarter. And in the future, if they're 9-3 compared to a 10-2 or 11-1, the standard is not 10-2 or 11-1. It's the best teams.
Heat.
I mean, that is a not so secret shot at Florida State. We weren't hanging banners. We weren't stomping our feet. And now this conversation about, is Florida State damaged goods? I don't think there's any doubt they're damaged goods.
Mm-hmm.
And I just go back to the question of, okay, well, what happens when you win this lawsuit? I don't believe they will. No, most people don't believe they will. But let's say Florida State wins this lawsuit. Now what? Are you telling me that you hear that and you see the national reporting and you believe that Florida State is going to end up in the SEC? Man, I have a hard time believing that. I have a hard time believing that. And that's the most powerful guy in college football.
Mm-hmm.
That's Greg Sankey, the commissioner, talking to one of the most respected college football guys, Matt Hayes, who I used to work with at Sporting News, who is a really good football guy. And on one of the biggest sports talk shows, 1010XL, Matt Hayes in Jacksonville, you're shooting a cannon down Center Street in Tallahassee. My guess is Florida State's going to have a tough time getting into the SEC.
Well, and I think like when I watched that clip, what struck me was how comfortable he was saying that. There was no hesitation. There was no hey, better be careful, better not hurt Florida State. No, it was hey, dude, we didn't do this. We got screwed too, but we just kept going. And I just think that Florida State's reputation has taken a beating here. And I think that, again, anytime in life you're a sore loser and you throw a fit to the point where you're spending hundreds of millions of dollars on it, it's just a bad look. And I think that is why they, are damaged goods, as people are calling them now.
Yeah, it's wild to me. It is absolutely wild to me. And that's not all Greg Sankey said yesterday and by the way, this is Radio Row that you're looking at in these clips at SEC Media Day in their new home of Dallas, Texas, which still pisses me off to this day. But here's Greg Sankey talking about the college football playoff.
So when you break it down, you have to understand it's not the 12 best teams.
Right.
It's the 5 best conference champions. 4 of them get a bye and know where they are. Then you've got a 5th that gets seeded. and then you've got the 7 remaining best teams.
Right.
That's the expectation. So you may be ranked 12th and not in because a 16th ranked conference champion's in. That's the deal. That's more access for better teams, and that 5th spot may be among 5 conferences that may have 3 or 4 teams November 1st vying for a conference championship and opportunity. There's 20 teams that are in, and then the top 20 has the ability to access those remaining spots, arguably.
Yeah.
In the past, if you weren't in the top 10 November 1,
forget it.
You know, you're not playing for the championship, and we value those things.
Arguably. Friends, you better understand something. This new college football playoff system was not meant to make more people have access to, or more universities have access to, the college football playoff. Just the opposite.
Yeah.
This was put in place to make sure that Georgia gets in. This was put in place now to make sure Florida State does not get in. Because what did Greg just say right there? The czar of college football just said if you're ranked number 12, there's a chance you're not getting in. Did he just openly to your?
So when you're looking at the college football playoff in November,
it's not a level playing field.
I don't want to see. Oh well, Marty, we're ranked 11th. That means we're in. No, it doesn't mean you're in. That is not how the college football playoff works. So just make sure you're clear on that.
Nope. Wow, look at that. Aaron Wilson back in the chat. Wow,
baby.
Aaron Wilson, a member of the show for 15 months. Aaron, good to see you. Howdy, y'all. Miss you guys. Wreck 'em. Pew, pew. Exactly. Good to see you, Aaron Wilson. The real Pete Forte gifts 10 Monty Show memberships.
Go, Pete.
Pete's been a member of the show for 8 months. Thank you, Pete. We appreciate the pro rata you deserve. Great job. Good to see you. Aaron Wilson. We were talking about you yesterday and how much we missed you. So it's good to see you, I think. And we'll find out.
And stuff.
So good to see you, my guy. Eric in Raleigh, G5 is a new Division II. It is. It absolutely is. And there's no question that that's the case. What are you sending me here?
Donation to the Advocates.
A donation. Well, we always appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Let's see.
Not having a competition today.
Not having a competition today. No, we are not.
This is just a donation from Oak State James. Want to give the guy credit? $10.
Hey, Monty Show kids, would you give me the gift card if I got books on leadership? I've read a few John Maxwell books. Well, I mean, that's better than reading books on
other stuff.
We had an interesting conversation with Oak State James the other day.
Yeah.
About his choice. Mike Smith, Mountain Mama, how are you? Backroom shady suspect meetings with greedy rich men looking for more money since they have to pay athletes now. Not wrong.
Yeah.
Not wrong. Not wrong at all. Kay Nurin, 22 million out of 200 is just 10%. It's crazy.
Well, and that's the thing you have to understand. I think it's a great point. Like the whole concept of revenue sharing $22 million per school is just basically saying to the Ohio States of the world, the Power 4 schools, all right, hey, take your overall number, chop that thing down by 22 million.
Yeah.
And now you got to recoup that money, which is why they're doing this.
Yep. Wow, look at that. Members only content. Justin Bemis, welcome to the members only.
Let's go, baby.
Make sure you DM Jake. That'll get you into our Instagram members only group for as long as you can survive. Because it seems like several new members chose to come in and then they were chosen to go out.
Yeah, quote, stirring the pot. Yeah, that didn't work out.
Yeah, if you're likes to fight guy, you probably don't want to get into the members only chat. It's a good group of dudes. We have 70 something members.
Yeah,
in our members only Instagram chat, and it's great. So Justin, make sure you DM Jake. He will hook you up into that group. Welcome. We appreciate you as always. J2H hates the G5. He hates Murica.
I don't hate Murica. What I don't like is the little guy wanting the benefit without having to pay. I mean, we shouldn't be saying to the big boys, yeah, you know what? You're still going to have to play the little guy, even though the little guy's not paying to play you. Like we shouldn't be saying that. We should be saying, hey, it's a very simple criteria. You want a revenue share? You can play with the big dogs. You don't want a revenue share? You're going to play with these guys. And that's fine. That's totally fine. But the choice is clear and the choice is simple. So what's your decision?
Yeah, I hate the G5. It just is what it is. Oak State James, stadium guy, and he loves the Big 12.
Okay.
Better than he had Bucky's on there for the longest time.
I'm a man.
I think you should put Love Priestporn because that's what. Anyway, James is a pastor, and he's currently going back to TCU to get his doctorate in priest atrocities.
God bless.
Knock yourself out, kid.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I think it should be based on stadium size. If your stadium holds less than 40K, you aren't in the Super League. Wake Forest is out. Boise State, when they are done with renovations, is in.
Well, thanks for sharing your opinion because that's never going to happen.
Well, should we? Now, here's a wild theory.
Marty?
Should we enclose the corners and put more seats in so that we can get into the rich white guy league? It's an interesting question. Anyway, do I say no? All right, MAGA boy. Rutgers is making the same, if not more, than Notre Dame at the moment. They're not. It's not even close. They're not.
Yeah.
And according to the, let's see, where is Rutgers in the Sportico? Let's look at Rutgers, because most people, I think, would agree that Notre Dame's somewhere around $260 million. Rutgers in this database? They are right there. Rutgers is making $125.4 million in revenue, spending $153.5 million.
Dude, that's such a loss.
They're losing $2.50 for every one they spend on football. And they are losing $3 for every one they spend on basketball. And yeah, their biggest expense is by far coaches' compensation, followed by administrator compensation, followed by athletic student aid. So I'm going to say that Rutgers is not making anywhere near what Notre Dame is making.
Yeah,
which is fine. Justin Bemis, hey Monty, keep it coming. Love the show. Appreciate you. Thank you. Always good. Yale Stadium holds 60,000, so they're into the Super League.
dude. Wow, book it.
Yeah.
Come on, man. You guys understand this though, and I know, like, we have a lot of Fresno State fans that watch the show. We have a lot of San Diego State fans. We have a lot of Boise fans. Idaho's a big market for us. A lot of Utah State fans. Like, we have a lot of G5s that watch this show, including Michigan fans. So what I would tell you is, you don't want to be in the Super League. You cannot compete at that level. If you think about the money, and one of the main things that you're going to be able to do in this upper tier where the P4 are going to live, you're going to be able to spend significantly more money, which right now you're not allowed to do. You're going to be able to pay players, which right now you're not allowed to do. Like, the financial outlay is going to bankrupt you.